In a luxurious hall where a billionaire, about to sign a multi-million-dollar deal, believed his victory was guaranteed, an almost invisible detail hid the greatest trap of his life. Among renowned experts and supposedly authentic documents, only one person noticed what no one dared to question. A simple attendant, driven by a secret knowledge she had carried since childhood, found the courage to interrupt a decisive moment. And when she uttered an unexpected phrase in Arabic, the fate of everyone in that room changed forever. Before following this story full of tension, mystery, and twists, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more surprising stories. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sweet scent of exotic incense, hanging over the private suite of the Excelsior Hotel. The golden late afternoon light filtered through the large windows, bathing the polished mahogany table where the silent drama of a $200 million negotiation was unfolding. At the center of the table, under the gaze of tense, calculating eyes, rested an ancient scroll, its yellowed, fragile surface a witness to centuries of history. Omar Al-Fayed, the billionaire with piercing eyes and an impeccable posture, slid his fingers over the document. His consultants, men in expensive suits and with serious expressions, nodded in approval. Beside him, representatives from a renowned historical authentication firm, with their certificates and seals of authenticity, guaranteed the manuscript's legitimacy. That piece of papyrus, according to the experts, was the key to resolving a territorial dispute that had dragged on for generations, and Omar's signature would seal the fate of a people. As the tension mounted, a discreet figure moved with the lightness of a shadow. Aisha, the server responsible for the tea and water service, glided between the guests, her uniform immaculate, her face impassive. No one really noticed her. She was just part of the furniture, a functional element in the scenery of power and wealth. With the tray in her hands, she approached the table, her eyes lowered, as always. But for an instant, just a brief and imperceptible instant, her gaze shifted to the scroll. It was a flash, a lightning bolt of recognition that struck her. Something inside her trembled, a cold sensation that shot up her spine. Raised in the shadow of a mother who was an expert in ancient manuscripts, Aisha had spent her childhood and adolescence immersed in a universe of forgotten scripts, rare inks, and yes, forgery. Methods so sophisticated they bordered on art. Her mother, a brilliant academic with a murky past, had taught her to see beyond the surface, to decipher the secrets hidden in the fibers of the paper and the strokes of the writing. Aisha had abandoned that world years ago, seeking an anonymous and quiet life, far from the shadows and dangers that her mother's erudition seemed to attract. But the trained eye, the sharp intuition, never left her. And now, facing that scroll, as Omar Al-Fayed raised his pen to sign the contract that would change the course of everything, she couldn't remain silent. The words escaped her lips in an urgent whisper, in Arabic, the language her mother had taught her to love and decipher. Hadha Muzayef. The sound, soft as a breath, reverberated in the tense silence of the room. All eyes turned to her, first with surprise, then with indignation. Who was this insignificant employee to dare interrupt a deal of such magnitude? Omar Al-Fayed's consultants glared at her, and the representatives from the authentication firm turned pale. But Omar the billionaire didn't say a word. His eyes, previously focused on the scroll, were now fixed on Aisha, a mixture of curiosity and bewilderment. That heavy, expectant silence was the encouragement she needed. "There are words that didn't exist in the period represented, sir," she began, her voice now firmer, though still low. "And the strokes. They imitate, but they don't reproduce the true calligraphy. There's an imprecision, a hesitation that a scribe from that period would never make." The lead expert, a man with thin glasses and a pedantic air, frowned. With an impatient sigh, he leaned over the scroll, rereading the line Aisha had pointed to with a subtle gesture. His eyes scanned the letters, then returned to the server's face, and then back to the scroll. A grey pallor washed over his face. He turned white as a sheet. She was right. In seconds, the supposed authentication crumbled like a house of cards. The shock was palpable. Omar Al-Fayed, with a sharp movement, pulled the pen away. His voice, deep and authoritative, echoed through the suite. "Revoke this contract. Immediately." And then a new, even more devastating blow came to light. Upon examining the clauses with the new perspective of the forgery, Omar's lawyers discovered a perfectly constructed trap. Hidden clauses, masterfully drafted, would transfer total control of the territory, even if the document were later deemed false. It was a double cross, a masterstroke that would have cost Omar not only $200 million, but also his history, his rights, and his people's heritage. Aisha's intervention had prevented a disaster of incalculable proportions. The authorities were called. Those directly involved in the fraud, including the supposed authentication experts, were detained before they could even react. The private suite, once the stage for a multi-million-dollar negotiation, was transformed into a crime scene. Omar Al-Fayed, still stunned by the magnitude of the betrayal, approached Aisha. His eyes, once cold and calculating, now shone with genuine admiration. "Who are you really?" he asked, his voice soft, almost a whisper. The revelation of her academic past, of her childhood among manuscripts and her mother, the expert in ancient calligraphy, rekindled something Aisha had tried to bury for years, her undeniable talent. The billionaire, impressed, made an unexpected proposal. It wasn't a monetary reward, but something far more valuable, an invitation to work at a newly created institute dedicated to identifying forgeries and protecting priceless historical documents. At first, Aisha hesitated. The idea of returning to that world, of diving back into the shadows of erudition and danger, frightened her. But the dormant passion, the call of her talent, was too strong to ignore. She eventually accepted. Little did she know that the fake scroll was just the tip of the iceberg. While investigating other suspicious manuscripts that arrived at the institute, Aisha discovered that the fraud was part of a much larger, intricate and dangerous network, driven by clandestine collectors and corrupt experts who manipulated history for their own ends. Days later, a new twist emerged. Aisha, accompanied by a security specialist and the institute's head of security, infiltrated a secret meeting. The location, an old mansion on the outskirts of the city, exuded an air of mystery and illegality. There, another scroll was to be negotiated, one that, according to confidential information, was part of the same forgery network. The moment her eyes landed on the document, Aisha felt the same chill. The forgery technique was identical, the same imprecise strokes, the same anachronistic words. Without hesitation, she confronted the host, a man with an austere demeanor and evasive eyes, in front of all the guests. With a voice that echoed through the hall, she revealed that he was not just a buyer but a crucial link, working for the mastermind behind the entire network. Chaos erupted. Armed guards, hidden in the shadows, tried to surround her, but her team, trained for high-risk situations, acted with surgical precision, extracting her just in time amidst a blur of shouts and shoves. Although the criminal group escaped, the scheme was unmasked and exposed to the light of day. Back in the capital, Aisha was no longer the invisible server. Her courage and talent had transformed her. Now she led a specialized department at Omar Al-Fayed's institute, tasked with tracking and preventing new attempts at historical manipulation. And it all began with that instant when she had the courage to say, in Arabic and before the powerful, "This is fake." Thus, the woman who served tables became the one responsible for saving a billionaire from a $200 million fraud, and for confronting a network that sought to rewrite the past to control the future. Aisha felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, a burden that, surprisingly, didn't crush her but propelled her forward. The office she now occupied at the Al-Fayed Institute was a stark contrast to the hotel's private suite. Walls, lined with books, ancient maps, and manuscript reproductions filled the space, a sanctuary for the history she had now sworn to protect. The view of the vibrant, chaotic city stretched beyond the window, a constant reminder of the real world she was defending. Her first step was to dive into the details of the scroll fraud. Every stroke, every word, every imperfection was analyzed under a magnifying glass, not just to understand the forger's technique, but to identify their signature. Her mother always said that no matter how perfect the imitation, the forger always left a mark, a tick, an error that revealed their identity, and Aisha was determined to find that mark. With the help of a multidisciplinary team, historians, paleographers, forensic chemists, and even experts in Arabic linguistics, she began to unravel the web. The fake scroll, which had nearly cost Omar al-Fayed a fortune and a legacy, was just one thread. Soon other suspicious documents began to surface, brought in by collectors and institutions who, after the publicity of the al-Fayed case, felt emboldened to question the authenticity of their own pieces. Aisha noticed a disturbing pattern. The forgeries weren't random. They focused on documents that could alter the perception of crucial historical events, rewrite the origins of powerful families, or, as in Omar's case, legitimize territorial claims. It wasn't just about money. It was about power, about controlling the narrative of the past to shape the future. One of the cases that intrigued her most was a series of letters attributed to a famous 15th-century explorer. The letters, which supposedly revealed secret trade routes and the discovery of unknown lands, had been used to justify the ownership of vast tracts of land by an old European family. Aisha's initial analysis revealed the same forced calligraphy, the same linguistic acronyms she had identified in Omar's scroll. "It's the same hand," she murmured to herself, her eyes fixed on the projection of one of the letters, or at least the same school. Her head of security, a former intelligence agent named Elias, watched her with a mix of respect and concern. "Aisha, you're working too hard. We need a strategy, not just intuition." She smiled, a tired but determined smile. "My intuition is my strategy, Elias. And it's telling me we're dealing with someone who isn't just a skilled forger but a historian, someone who knows the gaps and weaknesses in our understanding of the past." Aisha's team began to map the connections between the forged documents. They discovered that many of them had passed through the hands of the same art auctioneer in Geneva, a man named Julian Thorne, known for his discretion and for dealing with pieces of dubious origin. Thorne was a ghost almost impossible to track, but his reputation in the art underworld was legendary. Aisha knew she needed more than circumstantial evidence. She needed irrefutable proof, something that would link Thorne directly to the forgeries and, more importantly, to the mastermind behind it all. The opportunity arose when a new piece, a nautical chart supposedly from the 16th century, appeared on the black market, with rumors that it would be auctioned at an exclusive event in Monaco. "This is our chance," Aisha declared to her team, her eyes shining with renewed intensity. "If we can prove this chart is a fake before it's sold, we can expose Thorne and, who knows, get to the real puppet master behind the curtain." The mission in Monaco would be risky. The event was known for its airtight security and for attracting a clientele that preferred to remain in the shadows. But Aisha was ready. She was no longer the discreet server. She was the guardian of history, and she was willing to go wherever necessary to protect it. Aisha knew the mission in Monaco would require more than her expertise in manuscripts. She would need a strategy that combined intelligence, discretion, and above all the ability to blend into an environment where every glance was an assessment, every smile a mask. Elias, the head of security, was the first to voice his concerns. "Monaco isn't Geneva, Aisha. Thorne operates on a different level there. It's a viper's nest, and you don't have field experience," Elias argued, his voice heavy with genuine worry. "Elias, my experience is seeing what others don't. And that's exactly what I'll do there," Aisha replied, the determination in her eyes unshakable. "We need someone who can blend in, who won't raise suspicion, and unfortunately my new position makes me an easy target if I'm recognized." The solution came from an unexpected source. One of the historians on the team, Dr. Lena Petrova, a middle-aged Russian woman with an enigmatic past and a passion for antique jewelry, offered to go. Lena had a network of contacts in the world of European high society that rivaled any diplomats, and her passion for art and antiques was genuine. She would be the perfect front. Aisha, in turn, would operate in the shadows. Disguised as Lena's personal assistant, she would have access to the events backstage, the catalogues, And most importantly, the nautical chart. Elias's team provided discreet surveillance equipment, micro cameras and listening devices camouflaged in luxury accessories. The idea was for Lena, with her social grace, to create opportunities for Aisha to get close to the chart. Arriving in Monaco was like stepping into a movie. The glitter of yachts in the harbor, the glamour of the casinos, the opulence on every corner. The auction was to be held in a private villa overlooking the Mediterranean, a location so exclusive that entry was by personal invitation only. Lena, with her charm and flawless guest list credentials, opened the doors. Inside the villa, the air was thick with the scent of money and secrets. Art collectors, tycoons, royalty, and shadowy figures from the underworld mingled, each with their own hidden agendas. Julian Thorne, with his cold elegance and enigmatic smile, was the perfect host, moving among the guests like a predator in his territory. Aisha, dressed in a discreet suit and thin-framed glasses, stayed a step behind Lena, observing everything. Her eyes, however, were fixed on the nautical chart, displayed in a tempered glass case in the center of the main hall. It was an impressive piece with intricate details and a patina that suggested centuries of existence. Lena, following the plan, approached Thorne, praising the beauty of the piece and expressing genuine interest. As the two chatted, Aisha seized the opportunity to get closer to the case. Her fingers, trained to feel the nuances of paper and ink, itched to touch the chart. She needed a closer analysis, a touch, a smell. "It's a magnificent piece, don't you think, Dr. Petrova?" Thorne said, his eyes appraising Lena with calculated interest. "They say it reveals the location of a lost treasure." "Ah, lost treasures have always been the downfall of romantics," Lena replied with an enigmatic smile. "But the real beauty is in the history it tells, not the gold it promises." As the conversation unfolded, Aisha noticed a small detail. One of the chart's edges, slightly raised, revealed a lighter layer beneath the dark patina. It was almost imperceptible, but to her trained eyes it was a sign. The patina had been applied, it wasn't natural. With a quick, discreet movement, she activated the micro camera on her brooch, focusing on the edge of the chart. The image, transmitted to Elias and his team in a secure location, revealed what she already suspected. The patina was a recent application, and the ink used for the finer details did not match the chemical composition of the era. "It's a fake," Aisha whispered to herself, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "He's using the same technique." The challenge now was how to expose Thorne without causing an uproar that could compromise the mission. Elias's team was ready to intervene, but a direct confrontation there in that environment could be dangerous. Aisha needed a way to unmask Thorne unquestionably in front of all his potential buyers without giving him a chance to deny or flee. The answer came from a memory of her mother, who always said, "The best way to expose a lie is to let it reveal itself." Aisha stepped back from the display case, her mind racing. A direct confrontation would be a disaster. Thorne, with his network of contacts and his skill at manipulating situations, would easily turn the accusation into a personal attack, discrediting her, and by extension, the Al-Fayed Institute. She needed a more subtle strategy, one that would use Thorne's own arrogance against him. The idea came to her as she watched a group of guests animatedly discussing the authenticity of a Roman sculpture. The passion for art, the desire to own something unique and genuine, was the Achilles heel of these collectors. And Thorne, by selling forgeries, was exploiting that passion. Aisha approached Lena, who was still talking with Thorne, maintaining a respectful distance. "Dr. Petrova, forgive the interruption, but Mr. Al-Fayed asked me to verify a detail in the catalogue. Could you join me for a moment?" Lena, understanding the signal, excused herself from Thorne and followed Aisha to a more private corner. "What is it, dear? Did you find something?" "Yes, the chart is a fake. The patina is recent and the ink doesn't match, but we can't confront him directly. He'll deny it and discredit us," Aisha explained in a low voice. "We need the forgery to reveal itself." Lena, a glint in her eye, nodded. "I see. A small seed of doubt, planted in the right place, can blossom into a scandal." Aisha's plan was simple but audacious. She knew that Thorn, to enhance the value of his pieces, always presented an expert who would attest to the item's authenticity. In the case of the nautical chart, the expert was a renowned marine cartographer, Dr. Alistair Finch, known for his erudition and, unfortunately, for his vanity. Aisha instructed Lena to approach Finch and casually mention a small inconsistency in the chart, not a direct accusation, but an innocent question, an observation that only a trained eye would notice. The inconsistency was a tiny detail in the depiction of a specific ocean current, one that, according to Aisha's research, had only been accurately mapped decades after the chart's supposed creation. Lena, with her natural grace, approached Finch. "Dr. Finch, it's an honor to meet you. I'm a great admirer of your work. I'm fascinated by this nautical chart. However, a small curiosity has struck me. The depiction of the Agulhas current here, doesn't it seem a bit advanced for the 16th century? My memory might be failing me, but I thought the precision of that current was only achieved much later." Finch, flattered by Lena's attention and the opportunity to display his knowledge, moved closer to the chart. He examined the detail Lena had pointed out, his expression initially one of disdain, then of mild curiosity. The Agulhas current was one of his fields of expertise. He knew that the depiction there was, in fact, surprisingly accurate for the period, too accurate. As Finch pondered, Aisha discreetly sent a message to Elias. "Get ready, the seed has been planted." Thorn, who had been watching the scene from a distance, noticed the change in Finch's expression. He approached, a forced smile on his face. "Is there a problem, Dr. Finch? Is Dr. Petrova questioning the accuracy of your assessment?" Finch, a man of science and ego, did not like having his authority questioned, especially by an auctioneer. "No, Mr. Thorn. Dr. Petrova has raised an interesting point. The depiction of this current is, in fact, remarkably advanced for the era, almost anachronistic." The word anachronistic echoed through the hall. A few guests, who had already gathered around, began to whisper. Thorn tried to downplay the situation. "Come now, Dr. Finch. Perhaps it's just the genius of the original cartographer, ahead of his time. Genius, perhaps, but the precision here suggests a knowledge that simply did not exist in the 16th century, Finch retorted, his voice gaining strength. He was no longer defending Thorn. He was defending his own reputation. The technique for mapping ocean currents that would allow for such a depiction was only developed in the 18th century. This chart, if it were from the 16th century, would be a scientific miracle. The doubt, once planted, began to spread like a virus. The guests, once eager to own the chart, now looked at it with suspicion. Thorn tried to argue, but Finch, now in his element, continued to point out other inconsistencies, technical details that only an expert in nautical cartography would notice. The ink, the quality of the parchment, the very handwriting of the marginal notes, everything began to crumble under Finch's scrutiny. Aisha watched the scene with quiet satisfaction. Finch, unknowingly, was doing her work for her. He was unmasking the forgery, not through a direct accusation, but through irrefutable scientific analysis. Thorn's reputation, built on selling authentic pieces, was being pulverized in front of his own clients. The auction for the chart was cancelled. The potential buyers, feeling deceived, began to disperse, casting looks of contempt at Thorn. The seed of doubt had grown into a storm of mistrust. Thorn, his face red with fury, tried to approach Aisha and Lena, but Elias and his team, who had discreetly blended in with the guests, blocked his path. The mission in Monaco had been a success. The nautical chart was seized for a full forensic analysis, and Julian Thorn's reputation as a trustworthy auctioneer was in tatters. But Aisha knew this was just one battle won, not the war. Thorn was only a link in the chain. The true mastermind behind the network was still in the shadows, watching, learning, and undoubtedly planning his next move. Julian Thorn's downfall reverberated like thunder through the art underworld. The news spread quickly, not just in the circles of collectors and auctioneers, but also among the forgers, and those who profited from manipulating history. For Aisha, The victory in Monaco was a crucial step, but she knew the network was vast and complex. Thorne was an intermediary, a facilitator, not the architect. Back at the Al-Fayed Institute, Aisha and her team dove into the collected data. The forensic analysis of the nautical chart confirmed all. Her suspicions, revealing layers of ink and parchment that told a story of meticulous deception. But what was most important was what Thorne's fall revealed about the network structure. Thorne was the point of contact for many, Elias explained, pointing to a complex diagram mapping the auctioneer's connections. He didn't produce the forgeries, but he distributed them, and in doing so, he legitimized them for the luxury market. Aisha nodded, and the way he operated suggests he had access to a constant supply of high-quality forged material, someone who not only understands ancient manuscripts, but also has the resources to produce them on a large scale. The team began investigating Thorne's clients, looking for patterns. Many were obscure collectors, but some were prominent figures whose fortunes and reputations could be shaken if the truth about their acquisitions came to light. The pressure on Thorne to cooperate would be immense. However, Thorne, even while detained and under investigation, remained silent. His loyalty to the mastermind behind the network was unshakable, or perhaps his fear was even greater. Aisha realized that the threat of public exposure wasn't enough to break him. There was something more at stake. Aisha decided to change her approach. Instead of focusing on Thorne, she would concentrate on the origin of the forgeries. Where were they being produced? Who had the knowledge and resources to create such convincing documents? A detailed analysis of the materials used in the forgeries, the ink composition, the origin of the parchment, the pigments, began to reveal clues. The ink, for example, contained traces of rare minerals found only in a specific region of the Middle East. The parchment, though artificially aged, seemed to come from a common source suggesting mass production. "It's like a factory," Aisha murmured, examining the reports. Not a car factory, but a history factory. Dr. Lena Petrova, with her vast network of contacts, began investigating the black market for ancient materials. She discovered that in recent years there had been an unusual increase in the sale of high-quality blank parchments and rare pigments in certain regions. Most of these transactions were discreet, conducted through intermediaries, but Lena managed to trace some of them to a small Persian Gulf nation, known for its wealth and its interest in preserving and apparently rewriting its own history. Aisha felt a chill. The country in question was ruled by a royal family with a history of territorial disputes and an obsession with legitimizing their claims through historical documents. Was it possible that the forgery network was state-sponsored? The idea was terrifying. If it were true, Aisha would be facing not just a group of criminals, but an organization with unlimited resources and diplomatic protection. Omar Al-Fayed, informed of the new discoveries, was alarmed. If a state is involved, the implications are enormous, Aisha. This transcends fraud and enters the realm of geopolitics. "I know, Mr. Al-Fayed, but the truth must be revealed, no matter how powerful the hand that hides it," Aisha replied, her voice firm. Aisha and Elias began planning the next phase of the investigation. They needed someone to infiltrate the Persian Gulf nation, someone who could investigate the origin of the materials and perhaps find the forgery factory. The mission would be extremely dangerous, requiring absolute discretion and the ability to operate in a hostile environment. Elias suggested one of his best agents, a man with experience in covert operations and fluency in Arabic. But Aisha had another idea. She knew that to unravel the secrets of that network, she needed someone who could see beyond appearances, someone who understood the art of forgery as well as she did. "I'll go," Aisha declared, surprising Elias. "I'm the only one who can recognize the forger's signature on site. I'm the only one who can find the source." Elias tried to argue, but the determination in Aisha's eyes was unshakable. She had spent her life running from her past, but now that very past was her greatest weapon. She was the only one who could uncover the truth. The trip to the Persian Gulf would be the most dangerous of her life. She would be entering the heart of the network, not knowing who the real enemy was. But Aisha was ready. She was the guardian of history. and she was willing to risk everything to protect it. Aisha's decision to go to the Persian Gulf herself was met with a mix of admiration and apprehension by her team. Elias, in particular, was visibly worried. "Aisha, you're invaluable here. Putting yourself in direct risk. It's reckless." "Elias, I'm the only one who can identify the forger's signature on location. My intuition, my knowledge, they're the sharpest tools we have. Besides, who better to blend into an environment where discretion is the most valuable currency than someone who has spent her life being invisible?" Aisha argued, her voice calm but firm. Omar Al-Fayed, after a long conversation with Aisha, reluctantly agreed. He arranged for discreet diplomatic cover and ensured that all the Institute's resources would be at her disposal. The trip would be under the pretext of academic research on the history of Arabic calligraphy, a perfect cover for Aisha, given her background. Arriving in the Persian Gulf nation was a shock for Aisha. The opulence was even greater than in Monaco, but with a layer of conservatism and tradition that made it more impenetrable. Futuristic, skyscrapers rose alongside ancient souks, and luxury cars glided down streets where women like her wore veils that covered almost their entire faces. Her first challenge was to establish a discreet base of operations. She stayed in a charming boutique hotel, far from the major tourist centers, and began frequenting libraries and historical archives, using her academic credentials to gain access. Her goal was twofold: to research the history of local calligraphy as part of her cover, and at the same time to look for any sign of the forgery factory. Aisha knew the key to finding the source of the materials would be in the details. She spent hours examining ancient manuscripts, not just for their content, but for the quality of the parchment, the composition of the ink, the binding technique. She was looking for anomalies, for something that didn't fit, for a clue that would lead her to the supplier. Dr. Lena Petrova, back in Europe, continued to track the black market for materials. She discovered that a local antiques dealer, a man named Tariq Al-Hamad, had made several unusual purchases of high-quality blank parchment and rare pigments in recent months. Al-Hamad was known for his private collection of Islamic manuscripts, but also for his reputation of operating in a grey area of the market. Aisha decided that Tariq Al-Hamad would be her next target. She needed a way to get close to him without raising suspicion. The opportunity arose at a symposium on Arabic calligraphy, where Al-Hamad was one of the guest speakers. Dressed in an elegant abaya and a hijab that covered her hair, Aisha blended into the audience. She listened to Al-Hamad speak about the beauty and complexity of Islamic calligraphy. His passion for the art was evident, but Aisha noticed something else, a glint in Al-Hamad's eyes when he spoke of the authenticity and preservation of manuscripts, a glint that seemed almost ironic. After the lecture, Aisha approached Al-Hamad, praising his presentation and expressing her own interest in calligraphy. She introduced herself as a researcher from the Al-Fayed Institute, interested in collaborating on preservation projects. Al-Hamad, flattered, invited her to visit his private gallery. Tariq Al-Hamad's gallery was a treasure trove of Islamic art, with breathtaking manuscripts, ceramics, and jewelry. Aisha, while admiring the pieces, looked for any sign of the factory. She noticed that, despite the beauty of the pieces, there was a certain uniformity in the parchments of some of the more recent manuscripts, a consistency that seemed artificial. "Your collection is magnificent, Mr. Al-Hamad," Aisha commented, her eyes fixed on an illuminated Quran. "But I must say, the quality of the parchment in some of these more recent pieces is remarkable. It's hard to find such pure material these days." Al-Hamad smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I have my suppliers, miss. The art of calligraphy demands the finest materials." Aisha knew she was close. She needed a way to see Al-Hamad's suppliers, or at least the place, where he got his materials. She needed an excuse to go beyond the gallery. "I'm working on a project on the restoration of ancient manuscripts," Aisha said in a casual tone. "It would be of great value to my research if I could see the process of preparing the parchment, perhaps even the origin of the pigments. Do you have any contacts who could help me with that?" Al-Hamad hesitated for a moment, his eyes sizing up Aisha. He seemed to be calculating the risks. Finally, he said, "I know a craftsman who works with traditional methods. He's a reclusive man, but perhaps I can arrange a visit. However, he is very particular about who he receives." Aisha felt a thrill of excitement. She was on the right track. The reclusive craftsman was undoubtedly the missing link. She thanked Al-Hamad, promising to maintain discretion and confidentiality. The visit to the craftsman was scheduled for the following week. Aisha knew this would be her chance to solve the mystery. She was about to enter the heart of the forgery factory, and she didn't know what she would find. The week leading up to the visit with the reclusive craftsman was one of intense preparation for Aisha. She knew this was a golden opportunity, but also the most dangerous one. Elias, from the Al-Fayed Institute, had sent a small recording device and a micro-camera camouflaged in a brooch, both state-of-the-art and nearly undetectable. The instructions were clear: get evidence, but above all, ensure her safety. On the appointed day, Tariq Al-Hamad picked Aisha up from her hotel. The drive was long, taking them out of the city, through dusty roads that snaked through desert landscapes. The luxury of skyscrapers and shopping malls was left behind, replaced by simpler villages and finally by an isolated area where only a few adobe buildings stood out against the arid landscape. The craftsman's workshop was a modest building, almost hidden among the dunes. Upon entering, Aisha was enveloped by a peculiar smell of leather, ink, and something else, a subtle chemical odor she recognized from restoration labs. The interior was surprisingly spacious, with several workbenches, shelves filled with parchments, and jars of pigments of every color. The craftsman, an elderly man with a white beard and shrewd eyes, introduced himself as Rashid. His appearance was that of a traditional master, but Aisha felt a tension in the air, a watchfulness that went beyond simple reclusiveness. Al-Hamad explained that Aisha was a researcher, interested in traditional techniques for preparing materials. Rashid, with a nod, began to demonstrate the process of treating the parchment. He spoke of the importance of the hide, the process of stretching and scraping, all with a precision and knowledge that impressed Aisha. As Rashid spoke, Aisha discreetly activated the micro-camera on her brooch. Her eyes, however, were fixed on the details. She noticed that despite the traditional demonstration, there was modern equipment hidden under cloths and in locked cabinets. She saw vials of chemicals that were not part of the traditional parchment preparation process, but could be used to artificially age the material. Aisha asked to examine some of the parchments in different stages of preparation. Rashid, with an enigmatic smile, allowed it. As she touched the parchments, Aisha felt the texture, the elasticity. She noticed that some of them, though they looked old, had a uniformity in thickness and coloration that was difficult to achieve with purely artisanal methods. "It's fascinating, Rashid," Aisha commented, her voice maintaining a tone of admiration. "The precision you achieve is extraordinary, almost as if each piece were custom-made." Rashid just smiled, but Al-Hamad, who was watching the scene intently, seemed a bit uneasy. Aisha then turned her attention to the pigment area. She saw a vast range of colors, some of them rare and expensive. She asked about the origin of a specific blue pigment, which she had identified in some of the forgeries. "This blue is very particular," Aisha observed. "It's a shade rarely found in ancient manuscripts, unless it's from a very specific source." Rashid, for the first time, seemed a little uncomfortable. "It's a pigment I prepare myself, miss. An old family recipe." Aisha nodded, but her eyes caught a detail. On a higher shelf there was a bottle of a chemical with a label in a Western language, a binding agent not traditionally used in ancient pigments, but common in modern inks. She knew she had to go deeper. She needed a sample. "Rashid, your skill is unquestionable," Aisha said, with a tone that suggested a proposal. "I'm working on a restoration project for a very delicate manuscript, and the original ink has almost completely faded. I wonder if you could prepare a small amount of this blue pigment for me, using your family recipe. I would be willing to pay generously for your time and expertise." Rashid and Al-Hamad exchanged a look. Aisha's proposal was a test. If Rashid were a genuine craftsman, he would accept with pride. If he were a forger, he would hesitate, fearing the sample would reveal his secrets. Rashid smiled. "It would be an honor, miss. But my recipes are family secrets. I can prepare the ink for you, but I cannot reveal the ingredients." "I understand perfectly," Aisha replied, remaining calm. "Just a small amount so I can test its compatibility with the original manuscript." Rashid agreed. As he turned to prepare the ink, Aisha saw her chance. On a workbench there was a small piece of parchment with some notes and scribbles. It was a draft, but the handwriting was familiar. It was the same forced calligraphy, the same imprecise strokes she had identified in Omar al-Fayed's scroll. With a quick, imperceptible movement, Aisha took the small piece of parchment and hid it in her sleeve. She had the proof. The visit ended shortly after. Al-Hamad drove Aisha back to the hotel, and the entire way she felt the weight of the parchment. In her sleeve, the weight of the truth she had discovered. Back in her room, Aisha examined the piece of parchment. There was no doubt. The forgery factory was real, and Rashid was the craftsman behind it. But was he the mastermind, or just another link in the chain? Aisha knew she had to act fast. She had proof of the forgery, but she needed more to unmask the network and the true leader. She needed to understand the connection between Rashid, Al-Hamad, and the state that supposedly sponsored the operation. With the piece of parchment in hand and the recordings from the microcamera, Aisha felt a mix of relief and a new wave of urgency. She had found the factory, but the question of the mastermind still hung in the air. Rashid was a skilled craftsman, but his reclusiveness and the way Al-Hamad treated him suggested he was an employee, not the leader. Aisha immediately sent the evidence to Elias and his team at the Al-Fayed Institute. The small parchment fragment was subjected to a full forensic analysis, confirming the ink composition and the artificial aging technique Aisha had suspected. The recordings, meanwhile, revealed the hidden modern equipment and the uniformity of the materials, reinforcing the idea of large-scale production. While waiting for more detailed results, Aisha began to devise a plan to uncover the connection between Rashid, Al-Hamad, and the possible state sponsorship. She knew she needed more than proof of forgery. She needed proof of a conspiracy. Her first line of investigation was Tariq Al-Hamad. He was the link between production and distribution, the man who brought in the clients and the materials. Aisha decided she needed more information on Al-Hamad's transactions, especially those related to the purchase of materials and the sale of manuscripts. Using her academic credentials as a cover, Aisha began to frequent the art and antiques collector circles in the country. She introduced herself as a researcher interested in the Islamic manuscript market, asking seemingly innocent questions about the provenance of pieces, authentication methods, and the main dealers. She soon discovered that Al-Hamad had an ambiguous reputation. While respected for his vast collection and knowledge, there were whispers about the dubious origin of some of his pieces and his preference for cash transactions. Aisha also noticed that Al-Hamad had connections to members of the royal family, especially Prince Khalid, a young and ambitious royal known for his interest in cultural projects and his passion for collecting historical artifacts. Prince Khalid was the main patron of several historical preservation projects that, curiously, involved rewriting certain narratives to legitimize the territorial claims and history of the royal family. Aisha felt a chill. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit. State sponsorship wasn't just a theory, it seemed to be a reality. Prince Khalid, with his influence and resources, was likely the mastermind behind the network. But how to prove it? The connection between Al-Hamad and Prince Khalid was known, but it was one of a patron and a dealer, not of conspirators. Aisha needed something more concrete, something that linked the prince directly to the production and distribution of the forgeries. She decided she needed access to Al-Hamad's financial records, an almost impossible task in a country where banking privacy was strictly protected and corruption was a common tool. Aisha turned to Elias. "Elias, I need access to Tariq Al-Hamad's financial records, especially transactions related to the purchase of materials and the sale of manuscripts, and I need to know if there's any direct link to Prince Khalid's accounts." Elias, on the other end of the line, sighed. Aisha, that's extremely risky. Hacking into the financial records of a high-profile citizen in a foreign country could have serious diplomatic consequences. I know, Elias, but it's the only way to prove the connection. If Prince Khalid is behind this, he's the real mastermind, and if he's using state power to rewrite history, we need to expose him. Elias, after a moment of silence, agreed to try. He activated his network of contacts in the intelligence underworld, looking for hackers and cybersecurity experts who could access Al-Hamad's records without leaving a trace. While Elias worked behind the scenes, Aisha continued her research, delving deeper into the royal family's history and the narratives they were trying to promote. She discovered that several of the forged documents the Al-Fayed Institute had identified fit perfectly with Prince Khalid's agenda, legitimizing his claims and glorifying his family's history. The tension mounted with each passing day. Aisha felt like she was being watched. The glances in social circles, once curious, now seemed suspicious. She knew she was getting too close to the truth. One evening, as Aisha reviewed her notes in her hotel room, she received an encrypted message from Elias. We're in. Al-Hamad's records are in your hands. Look for transfers to an offshore account under a shell company. The company name is Phoenix Antiquities. Aisha opened the file with Al-Hamad's banking information. She scanned the transactions, looking for anything that matched Elias's description. And then she found it. Several significant transfers to an account in a tax haven in the name of Phoenix Antiquities. With a click, she opened the company's details. And the name of the director of Phoenix Antiquities made her heart stop. It was Prince Khalid. Aisha had the proof, the mastermind behind the forgery. Network wasn't just a collector or a dealer. It was a member of the royal family, using his power and influence to rewrite his country's history. The revelation was shocking, but also dangerous. Exposing Prince Khalid wouldn't just be a matter of justice, it would be an act of diplomatic war. Aisha knew her life was on the line. The revelation that Prince Khalid was the director of Phoenix Antiquities hit Aisha like a lightning bolt. The scale of the conspiracy was even greater than she had imagined. It wasn't just a matter of fraud and historical manipulation. It was a matter of power, of geopolitics, of rewriting a nation's identity. Aisha's life, already at risk, now hung by an even thinner thread. She knew she couldn't confront Prince Khalid directly. A royal with diplomatic immunity and unlimited resources would be untouchable. Any attempt to expose him publicly without irrefutable proof and a flawless strategy would result in her own annihilation and possibly discredit the Al-Fayed Institute. Aisha needed a way to unmask Prince Khalid without exposing herself directly. She needed an intermediary, someone who could present the evidence credibly and safely, and that intermediary, she realized, would have to be someone on the inside, someone with access to the circles of power, but who also had a sense of justice. Her mind turned to Omar Al-Fayed. He was an influential billionaire with connections all over the world. He had a personal stake in exposing the network, as he himself had been a victim. But above all, he was a man of principle who valued truth and historical integrity. Aisha sent an encrypted message to Omar, requesting an urgent and confidential meeting. She didn't reveal the details of her discovery in the message, only the urgency and gravity of the situation. While waiting for Omar's response, Aisha began to consolidate the evidence. She organized Al-Hamad's financial records, highlighting the transfers to Phoenix Antiquities. She compiled the forensic reports from Omar's scroll and the Monaco nautical chart, showing the same forgery technique. She gathered the recordings from Rashid's workshop, which revealed the mass production of forged materials. And finally, she added the irrefutable proof, the registration of Phoenix Antiquities, with Prince Khalid's name as director. Everything was meticulously documented, ready to be presented. Omar Al-Fayed responded quickly, arranging a secret meeting in a neutral location, a private yacht anchored in international waters, far from any jurisdiction or eavesdropping. Aisha, with Elias's help, managed to leave the Persian Gulf nation discreetly, using a private flight chartered by Omar. The meeting on the yacht was tense. Omar listened to Aisha with a grim seriousness, his eyes fixed on her as she presented the evidence. As Aisha revealed the extent of the conspiracy and Prince Khalid's involvement, Omar's expression hardened. "So, Prince Khalid is using the power of his state to rewrite history," Omar said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is more than fraud, it's a betrayal of the truth." "Exactly, Mr. Al-Fayed. And he's not just rewriting his own country's history. The documents we've identified, like your scroll and the nautical chart, have international implications, altering borders, legitimizing claims, and manipulating global narratives." Omar pondered for a moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Exposing a royal from a sovereign nation is an act of diplomatic war, Aisha. The consequences could be unpredictable." "I know, sir. But the alternative is to allow the truth to be distorted, to let history be erased and rewritten to serve political interests. We can't allow that." Omar nodded. "You're right. The truth must prevail. But we need a strategy that minimizes the damage and maximizes the impact. We can't just throw this information to the wind." Aisha had already thought about this. "We need a channel that is respected and impartial, one that can't be easily silenced or discredited. An international organization, perhaps, or a consortium of renowned historians and academics." Omar smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "I have an idea. The International Conference of Ancient Historians, happening in Geneva next month. It's a respected forum attended by academics, diplomats, and opinion leaders from around the world. If we present the evidence there, irrefutably, the impact will be global and undeniable." Aisha agreed. The conference would be the perfect stage. But there was a problem. Prince Khalid, as a patron of several cultural initiatives, would be one of the guests of honor. "He'll be there, Mr. Al-Fayed, and he'll do everything to silence us. That's why we need to be smarter, Aisha. We can't confront him directly. We need the truth to reveal itself, just like you did in Monaco. But this time, on a much larger scale." Omar proposed a bold plan. They would use the conference as a trap. Aisha, with her team's help, would prepare a flawless presentation, detailing the forgery techniques, the connections between the documents, and the financial evidence. The presentation would be delivered by a renowned academic, someone above suspicion, who couldn't be easily attacked. The climax of the presentation would be the revelation of Prince Khalid's involvement, not as a direct accusation, but as an inevitable conclusion based on the evidence. The idea was that the academic and diplomatic community, upon seeing the solidity of the evidence, would be forced to act. Aisha felt a chill run down her spine. It was a risky plan, but it was the only way to expose Prince Khalid without putting herself in direct danger. She would be behind the scenes providing the information, but the bombshell would be dropped by someone else. "And what about my safety, Mr. Al-Fayed?" Aisha asked, her voice slightly trembling. "You will be under my personal protection, Aisha, and the Institute's. No one will touch you, but you will have to disappear for a while after the conference, until the dust settles." Aisha nodded. She was ready for whatever came next. She had found the mastermind behind the network, and now it was time to unmask him. The preparation for the International Conference of Ancient Historians in Geneva became a war room operation for Aisha and the Al-Fayed Institute team. Time was short, and precision was crucial. Every detail of the presentation had to be flawless, every piece of evidence irrefutable, so that the revelation of Prince Khalid's involvement would be not just impactful, but unquestionable. Omar Al-Fayed mobilized his resources. He assigned a team of international lawyers to review every legal aspect of the presentation, ensuring there were no loopholes for counterattacks. Elias and his security team worked tirelessly to ensure the protection of Aisha and everyone involved, monitoring any suspicious movements and reinforcing the Institute's security. Aisha, for her part, immersed herself in crafting the content. She knew the presentation couldn't be a mere denunciation. It had to be a masterclass on the art of forgery and the importance of historical integrity. She worked side by side with Dr. Lena Petrova and other historians and paleographers from the Institute, compiling the evidence in a clear and persuasive manner. The challenge was to present the complexity of the forgery techniques in a way that was understandable to a diverse audience, which would include not only academics, but also diplomats, journalists, and opinion leaders. Aisha decided to use a visual approach, with detailed slides comparing the forged documents with authentic ones, highlighting the anomalies in calligraphy, ink composition, and patina. She also included the recordings from Rashid's workshop, showing the mass production process of the forged materials. The images of modern equipment hidden under cloths and the jars of anachronistic chemicals would be powerful visual proof of the factory. The crucial point of the presentation would be the connection between the forgeries and Prince Khalid. Aisha and her team created a complex but clear diagram that mapped the financial transactions from Tariq al-Hamad to Phoenix Antiquities, culminating in the revelation of Prince Khalid as the company's director. The presentation would be delivered gradually, building the narrative piece by piece until the inevitable conclusion. The choice of presenter was strategic. Omar al-Fayed suggested Dr. Aris Thorne, no relation to Julian Thorne, a renowned Greek historian and archaeologist, known for his unwavering integrity and his respected voice in the academic community. Dr. Thorne was a man above suspicion, and his reputation would lend weight and credibility to the presentation. Aisha spent hours rehearsing with Dr. Thorne, explaining every detail, every nuance of the evidence. She instructed him on how to present the information objectively, without passion, letting the facts speak for themselves. The idea was for the audience to reach their own conclusions, guided by the evidence. Security at the conference was a constant concern. Elias had infiltrated undercover security agents among the attendees and event staff. Omar al-Fayed, for his part, ensured that the presentation hall was equipped with the highest security technology, including signal jammers to prevent any attempt at external interference. Aisha knew that Prince Khalid, upon learning of the presentation, would try everything to stop it. He might try to discredit Dr. Thorne, bribe organizers, or even attempt to steal the evidence. Therefore, all copies of the presentation and evidence were encrypted and stored in secure locations with restricted access. In the days leading up to the conference, the tension was palpable. Aisha felt the stares, the whispers. She knew she was at the center of a storm that was about to break, but she was ready. She had dedicated her life to protecting history, and now it was time to fulfill her mission. On the day of the conference, Geneva was buzzing. Academics, diplomats, and journalists from all over the world gathered at the convention center. Prince Khalid was present, surrounded by his entourage, a confident smile on his face. He had no idea what awaited him. Aisha, disguised among Dr. Thorne's support staff, observed the room. Her eyes met Omar al-Fayed's, who gave her a discreet nod of encouragement. Dr. Thorne took the podium, his calm, authoritative voice filling the auditorium. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to be here today to discuss a topic of utmost importance to the integrity of our history. The presentation began. The first slides were about the importance of authenticating historical documents, the beauty of Arabic calligraphy, the evolution of writing techniques. The audience was engaged, but there was still no hint of what was to come. Aisha felt her heart beat faster. The moment of truth was approaching. Dr. Thorne's voice filled the auditorium, calm and methodical, as he guided the audience through the complexity of authenticating historical documents. Aisha, behind the scenes, watched every reaction, every movement. Prince Khalid, sitting in the front row, maintained an expression of forced politeness, occasionally exchanging whispers with his aides. He seemed bored, perhaps even a little arrogant, oblivious to the gathering storm. The presentation moved forward, and Dr. Thorne began to introduce the first examples of forged documents without mentioning specific names or origins. He compared the calligraphy, ink composition, and patina of authentic pieces with the forgeries, using high-resolution images that highlighted the discrepancies. The audience, composed of experts, began to lean forward, absorbing every detail. Notice the uniformity of the line thickness here. Dr. Thorne pointed to a projection of Omar al-Fayed's scroll, and compare it with the natural variation found in an authentic manuscript from the same period. The excessive precision in this case is an indicator of manipulation. Murmurs began to spread through the auditorium. The academics, with their trained eyes, recognized the signs. Dr. Thorne then introduced the forensic evidence, the chemical analysis of the ink revealing the presence of modern binding agents, and the dating of the parchment, which contradicted the document's supposed age. Aisha felt a chill. The truth was being revealed, piece by piece. Dr. Thorne then moved on to the Monaco nautical chart, using the same methodology. He highlighted the anachronistic depiction of the Agulhas current, the artificial patina, and the inconsistencies in the handwriting of the marginal notes. With each new piece of evidence, Prince Khalid's expression grew more tense. His whispers with his aides became more frequent and agitated. "And now," Dr. Thorne announced, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "we would like to present evidence that suggests a connection between these forgeries and a large-scale production network." He then showed the recordings from Rashid's workshop. The images of modern equipment, industrial chemical vials, and the uniformity of the materials were undeniable. The audience fell silent, shocked by the scale of the operation. "This history factory," Dr. Thorne continued, "not only produces forged documents but also distributes them through a complex network of intermediaries, including renowned art auctioneers." He paused, and Aisha felt the tension in the air. One of these intermediaries, as many of you may recall, was Julian Thorne, whose involvement in an auction of a forged nautical chart in Monaco was widely reported. The name Julian Thorne caused a stir. Prince Khalid, visibly uncomfortable, tried to get the attention of one of his aides, but the man was engrossed in the presentation. "The question that arises," Dr. Thorne proceeded, "is who is behind this network? Who has the power, the resources, and the motive to orchestrate a historical manipulation of such magnitude?" He then displayed the diagram Aisha had prepared. The arrows and names began to connect, showing the financial transactions from Tariq al-Hamad to Phoenix Antiquities. With each new connection, the tension in the auditorium mounted. Finally, Dr. Thorne arrived at the final slide, a clear image of the registration for Phoenix Antiquities, with Prince Khalid's name as director. A deafening silence fell over the auditorium. The shock was palpable. Prince Khalid, his face pale and his eyes wide, shot up from his chair. "This is an outrage," he shouted, his voice echoing through the auditorium. "Slander, a conspiracy to discredit my country and my family." The prince's aides tried to calm him, but he was out of control. He pointed at Dr. Thorne, his eyes filled with fury. "You will be held responsible for this. My country will not tolerate such baseless accusations." Dr. Thorne, however, remained calm. "Prince Khalid, the evidence is clear. The documents speak for themselves. And Phoenix Antiquities, as we have shown, is the entity that finances and coordinates this forgery network." The audience, though shocked, was divided. Some were outraged by the revelation, others seemed skeptical, perhaps fearing the political implications. Journalists began snapping photos and recording the scene. Omar Al-Fayed, who was sitting in the front row, stood up and approached a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Al-Fayed Institute fully supports Dr. Thorne's presentation. We ourselves were victims of this network, and the evidence we have presented is irrefutable. The truth, however inconvenient, must prevail." Omar Al-Fayed's intervention gave even more weight to the presentation. His reputation and influence were undeniable. Prince Khalid, realizing the situation was spiraling out of his control, tried to leave the auditorium, but was surrounded by journalists and photographers. His aides tried to shield him, but the chaos had already taken hold. Aisha watched the scene, a sense of victory mixed with a pang of apprehension. The bombshell had been dropped. The truth was exposed, but the consequences were yet to come. The conference, which was supposed to be a forum for academic discussion, had turned into the stage for an international scandal. Prince Khalid's reputation was in tatters, and the forgery network had been unmasked. But what would happen now? Would Prince Khalid accept defeat? Or would he try to retaliate, using his power and influence to silence those who had exposed him? The chaos that followed the revelation at the Geneva conference was immediate and overwhelming. The images of Prince Khalid, pale and furious, trying to escape the media siege, were broadcast live to the world. The news spread like wildfire, dominating headlines and social media. The conference, intended as a discreet academic event, became the epicenter of an international scandal. The international community reacted with a mixture of shock and outrage. Diplomats from various countries expressed concern over the manipulation of history and the geopolitical implications of the fraud. Cultural organizations and academic institutions issued statements, vehemently condemning Prince Khalid's actions and demanding a full investigation. For Prince Khalid, the consequences were swift and brutal. His country, under intense international pressure, was forced to issue an official statement, distancing itself from the prince's actions and promising an internal investigation. However, the government's credibility was already shattered. The prince was immediately stripped of all his public offices and had his assets frozen, while authorities in his own country began impeachment proceedings. Julian Thorne, the art auctioneer, who was already under investigation, saw his case escalate exponentially. The evidence presented in Geneva linked him directly to the forgery network, and the pressure for him to cooperate with the authorities mounted. Tariq al-Hamad, the antiques dealer, was arrested in his country, and his gallery was sealed. Rashid, the craftsman, was also detained, and his workshop, the History Factory, was dismantled. Aisha, under the protection of Omar al-Fayed and Elias, was taken to a secure location immediately after the conference. She watched the developments from afar, a sense of relief mixed with the exhaustion of a newly won battle. The truth had prevailed, but the cost had been high. Omar al-Fayed, in a press conference, reinforced the Al-Fayed Institute's commitment to historical integrity and announced the creation of a global fund for the authentication and preservation of ancient documents. He also praised Aisha's courage and expertise, though without revealing her full identity, protecting her from public exposure. In the days that followed, the Al-Fayed Institute team worked tirelessly to identify and authenticate all the documents that had passed through the hands of the forgery network. Many collectors, fearing the devaluation of their pieces and the stain on their reputations, voluntarily submitted their manuscripts for analysis. The scale of the fraud was staggering. Hundreds of documents, from different eras and origins, were identified as forgeries. Aisha, even in her hiding place, continued to work, analyzing every piece, every stroke, every word. She felt that although the network had been dismantled, the wound in history was still open. The truth needed to be restored, document by document. However, the victory did not come without its challenges. The exposure of Prince Khalid generated a wave of resentment in his country. Some saw him as a martyr, a victim of a Western conspiracy. Nationalist and extremist groups began to protest, accusing the Al-Fayed Institute and Aisha of interfering in internal affairs and trying to rewrite their country's history. Elias warned Aisha about the growing threat. "You've become a symbol, Aisha. To some, a hero. To others, an enemy. We need to keep your identity secret and your security as the top priority." Aisha knew her life would never be the same. She had traded the anonymity of a hotel server for the dangerous notoriety of a guardian of history. But she had no regrets. The truth was a value she was willing to defend at any cost. A week after the conference, Aisha received a message from Omar al-Fayed. He invited her to a meeting in his office, in a secure and discreet location. He had a new proposal, something that would change the course of her life again. Arriving at Omar's office, Aisha found him with a serious expression, but with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Aisha, the network has been dismantled, but the work of protecting history is far from over. We need strong leadership, someone with your vision and expertise to guide the Institute in this new era." He paused, and Aisha felt her heart race. "I would like to offer you the position of director of the department of historical authentication and preservation at the Al-Fayed Institute. You would have unlimited resources, a dedicated team, and the freedom to shape the future of historical protection." Aisha was silent for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of the proposal. It was an immense responsibility, a challenge that would take her far beyond anything she had ever imagined. But she knew it was her destiny. "I accept, Mr. Al-Fayed," she said, her voice firm and full of determination, "and I promise I will do everything in my power to protect the truth." Aisha had found her place in the world. From an invisible server, she had become the guardian of history, ready to face any challenge that lay ahead. Aisha took over as director of the Department of Historical Authentication and Preservation at the Al-Fayed Institute with renewed energy and a clear vision. Her first major challenge wouldn't be hunting down a new forger, but rebuilding trust. The Prince Khalid scandal had shaken the foundations of the academic world and the art market, creating a wave of skepticism and mistrust regarding the authenticity of many historical documents. "Our priority now is to restore faith in history," Aisha declared in her first team meeting. "We need to establish new, more rigorous and transparent standards of authentication and educate the public on the importance of verification. The truth isn't just something to be discovered, it's something to be protected and understood." To this end, Aisha launched an ambitious project, the creation of a global registry of authentic documents. The idea was to catalog and digitize all priceless historical manuscripts and documents, creating a database accessible to researchers and the public. Each document would undergo a complete forensic analysis, with its provenance, composition, and calligraphy documented, establishing a gold standard for authenticity. The project was monumental, requiring the collaboration of museums, libraries, and academic institutions from around the world. Aisha knew she would face resistance, especially from institutions that might have documents of dubious authenticity in their collections. But she was determined. Her first step was to strengthen the team. She brought in new talent, including young paleographers and forensic chemists, and invested in cutting-edge technology for document analysis. Dr. Lena Petrova became her right-hand woman, coordinating research and international collaboration. Elias, while still in charge of security, began to act as a strategic consultant, helping Aisha navigate the project's political and diplomatic complexities. Aisha also initiated a series of workshops and seminars to educate collectors, auctioneers, and the general public about forgery techniques and authentication methods. She believed that education was the best weapon against fraud. However, rebuilding trust would not be easy. The Prince Khalid case had left deep scars. Many collectors, fearing the devaluation of their pieces, hesitated to submit their documents to the new registry. Some even tried to sell their collections on the black market, before the authenticity of their pieces could be questioned. Aisha knew she needed a success story, something to demonstrate the effectiveness of the new registry and the importance of authentication. The opportunity arose with an ancient Egyptian papyrus, supposedly a fragment of the Book of the Dead, which had been in the possession of a European family for generations. The papyrus was considered one of the most valuable pieces in their collection, but its authenticity had never been fully proven. The family, after the Prince Khalid scandal, approached the Al-Fayed Institute, seeking definitive authentication of the papyrus. Aisha saw this as the perfect chance to demonstrate the value of the global registry. The analysis of the papyrus was meticulous. Aisha's team used a combination of traditional techniques and state-of-the-art technology, including X-ray spectroscopy, to analyze the ink composition and carbon-14 dating to determine the papyrus's age. Aisha, with her trained eye, examined every hieroglyph, every stroke, looking for any anomaly. The tension was palpable as the team worked. The authenticity of the papyrus wasn't just an academic question, it was a matter of millions of dollars and a family's reputation. After weeks of intense work, the results were conclusive. The papyrus was authentic. Every detail, from the ink composition to the calligraphy of the hieroglyphs, perfectly matched the period and provenance. Aisha presented the results to the family, who were overjoyed. The news of the authentication of the Egyptian papyrus, a priceless piece, was widely publicized, generating a wave of enthusiasm and renewing trust in the Al-Fayed Institute and the Global Registry of Authentic Documents. The case of the Egyptian papyrus was a turning point, Other institutions and collectors began to approach the institute, seeking authentication for their own pieces. The global registry began to grow, becoming an indispensable tool for the protection of history. Aisha, however, knew that the fight against forgery was an ongoing battle. Prince Khalid's network had been dismantled, but other forgers, inspired by profit and power, would emerge. She needed to stay one step ahead. Her next challenge would be to expand the Institute's reach, establishing partnerships with governments and international organizations to combat forgery on a global scale. She dreamed of a world where history was protected, where truth prevailed over lies. With the success of the Global Registry of Authentic Documents and the growing trust in the Al-Fayed Institute, Aisha felt it was time to take the next step, to expand the Institute's reach beyond borders, transforming it into a global force against historical forgery. She knew that the battle against the manipulation of history could not be won in isolation. It would require unprecedented international collaboration. Her plan was ambitious: to create a global network of authentication centers in partnership with governments and cultural institutions in different countries. These centers would be equipped with the same cutting-edge technology and would follow the same rigorous authentication protocols developed by the Al-Fayed Institute. The idea was to create a global shield against forgery, wherever it might arise. The first challenge was to garner international support. Aisha, accompanied by Omar Al-Fayed, embarked on a series of diplomatic trips, presenting her vision to world leaders, ministers of culture and museum directors. She argued that historical forgery was not just a crime against art, but a crime against a nation's cultural identity, capable of destabilizing regions and rewriting narratives for political ends. The response was varied. Some countries, still shaken by the Prince Khalid scandal, embraced the initiative with enthusiasm. Others, more skeptical or concerned about the sovereignty of their own institutions, were reluctant. Aisha, however, was persistent. She used the irrefutable evidence from Geneva, the success of the Global Registry, and the impeccable reputation of the Al-Fayed Institute as her main arguments. One of the biggest obstacles came from a European country with a rich colonial history. The government, fearing that rigorous authentication might expose the dubious provenance of some of its collections, resisted the idea of an independent authentication center. Aisha realized that the issue was not just about historical truth, but about the legacy and reputation of entire nations. She decided to approach the problem from a different perspective. Instead of focusing solely on authentication, she proposed a program of restoration and repatriation of historical documents. The idea was that the authentication centers would not only verify authenticity, but also offer expertise in restoration and, when appropriate, facilitate the repatriation of documents to their countries of origin, with the guarantee that they would be preserved and protected. This approach resonated deeply in many countries, especially those with a colonial past, who saw in Aisha's initiative an opportunity to reclaim part of their cultural heritage. The proposal of repatriation, in particular, broke down many barriers. With growing support, Aisha managed to establish the first authentication centers in strategic cities like London, Cairo, and Beijing. Each center was led by a local expert, trained by the Al-Fayed Institute team and equipped with the most advanced technology. However, global expansion brought new challenges. Forgery was not a homogeneous phenomenon. It varied from region to region, adapting to local cultures, materials, and histories. Aisha and her team had to develop new authentication techniques to deal with an even wider range of documents, from ancient Middle Eastern scrolls to Chinese silk manuscripts and pre-Columbian codices. Furthermore, the network of forgers, though weakened, had not completely disappeared. With the fall of Prince Khalid, new groups emerged, operating on a smaller scale, but with the same intention of manipulating history for profit or power. Aisha knew that constant vigilance was essential. A new type of forgery began to emerge: digital forgery. With the increasing digitization of historical documents, some groups began to create fake digital versions, altering the content or provenance of authentic documents. Aisha realized that the fight for truth would no longer be confined to the physical world. "We need to stay ahead, Elias," Aisha said to her head of security as they reviewed reports of new threats. "Forgery is evolving, and we need to evolve too." Elias, who had become one of her most loyal advisors, nodded. "Technology is a double-edged sword. Aisha, it can be used to forge but also to protect." Aisha launched a new project, the creation of a blockchain system for digital historical documents. Each authenticated document would be registered on a blockchain, guaranteeing its integrity and provenance, making manipulation impossible. Aisha was building a legacy, not just for the Al-Fayed Institute, but for the history of humanity. She had turned a crisis into an opportunity, and her vision was shaping the future of historical preservation. However, Aisha's personal life had changed drastically. Anonymity had vanished, replaced by a packed schedule of travel, meetings, and conferences. She was a public figure, a defender of truth, but also a target. Elias and his security team were a constant presence in her life. Aisha, however, didn't mind. She had found her purpose, and her passion for history drove her. She knew the fight would be long, but she was ready. Aisha's personal life had transformed into a whirlwind of commitments and responsibilities. The anonymity she had once cherished was now a distant memory. From a discreet server, she had become a public figure, a respected voice on the international stage of historical preservation. Her schedule was a mosaic of diplomatic trips, meetings with heads of state, lectures at universities, and the constant supervision of the Al-Fayed Institute's global expansion. The visibility brought with it a new layer of challenges. Elias and his security team were a constant presence, a protective shadow that accompanied her everywhere. The threat of retaliation, though diminished with Prince Khalid's fall, never completely disappeared. There was always the risk of remnant groups from the forgery network, or new enemies who emerged as the Institute gained more power and influence. Aisha felt the weight of the loneliness that came with her new position. The superficial friendships of the past had dissipated, and time to cultivate new relationships was scarce. Her mother, whom she visited whenever possible, was one of her few confidants, a source of wisdom and unwavering support. Dr. Lena Petrova and Elias, though colleagues, had become more than that. They were her closest allies, her chosen family. Balancing her professional and personal life was an art Aisha was still learning. The long work hours, the constant travel, and the pressure of always being one step ahead of the forgers took their toll. There were moments of exhaustion, of doubt, when she wondered if the sacrifice was worth it. But then she would remember the greater purpose, the importance of protecting the truth, and her determination would be renewed. One of her biggest challenges was to maintain her essence, the woman who grew up surrounded by manuscripts and who saw history not just as facts, but as living narratives. She feared that the bureaucracy, the politics, and the constant vigilance might harden her, stripping away the passion that drove her. To combat this, Aisha found refuge in her most intimate work, document analysis. She set aside a few hours each week to isolate herself in her personal lab, away from the meetings and the spotlight. There, surrounded by microscopes, magnifying glasses, and the familiar scent of parchment and ink, she reconnected with the essence of her mission. It was in those moments that she remembered the beauty of calligraphy, the complexity of pigments, the story that every fiber of paper told. It was during one of these sessions that a new mystery arose. A small papyrus fragment, donated by an anonymous collector to the global registry, caught her attention. It was a short text in an ancient and little-known language, with a script that seemed familiar, yet she couldn't immediately identify it. Aisha spent days poring over the fragment, using all her skills and knowledge. The ink, the papyrus fiber, the writing technique, everything seemed authentic. But there was something that bothered her, a subtle dissonance she couldn't ignore. The script, though ancient, had a fluidity that seemed too modern for the era. She consulted Lena, who was also intrigued. "It's as if the scribe learned to write in one era and then tried to imitate an older style," Lena observed. "It's a forgery, Aisha, one of the most sophisticated I've ever seen." Aisha agreed. It was a new kind of forgery, one that wasn't based on obvious anachronisms or improper materials, but on a subtle manipulation of the script, an almost imperceptible signature. It was the work of a master, someone who understood history and the art of writing on a profound level. The discovery left her unsettled. Prince Khalid's network had been dismantled, but it seemed a new type of forger had emerged, someone even more dangerous, because his art was nearly perfect. "We need to find who did this," Aisha said to Lena, her eyes shining with a new determination. "This is no ordinary forger. This is someone who is challenging the very essence of authenticity." Aisha knew this new challenge would take her into uncharted territory. The fight against forgery was evolving, and she needed to evolve with it. She was ready to face the new enemy, not just as the director of the authentication department, but as the guardian of truth she had become. The discovery of the forged papyrus, with its subtly anachronistic script, reignited a warning flame in Aisha. Prince Khalid's network had been dismantled, but the war against forgery was far from over. This new forger was different, more sophisticated, operating in the shadows, without the ostentation or geopolitical motives of the previous ones. He was an artist of deception, and that made him even more dangerous. "It's a master-level forgery," Aisha explained to Elias and Lena as the papyrus fragment was projected onto a screen. The ink, the papyrus, the language, everything looks perfect at first glance. But the fluidity of the script, the way the letters connect, is too modern for the era. It's as if a contemporary calligrapher studied and mastered an ancient style, but couldn't completely erase his own stylistic signature. Lena nodded. "It's a fascinating challenge. Most forgers make obvious mistakes. This one, however, is a scholar, someone who knows the history of writing as well as we do, perhaps even better." Elias, ever pragmatic, asked, "What's the goal? If it's not to manipulate borders or legitimize power, what's the motive?" Aisha pondered. "It could be money, of course. A forgery this perfect would be worth a fortune on the black market. But it could also be an intellectual challenge, a way to prove his superiority, to mock our ability to discern the truth. The first step to identifying the master forger would be to trace the origin of the papyrus. The anonymous collector who donated it to the global registry was the only link." Aisha instructed her team to investigate the collector, discreetly, so as not to alert the forger. The investigation revealed that the collector, an eccentric billionaire named Arthur Pendleton, had acquired the papyrus at a private auction in Venice about 6 months ago. The auction was known for its discretion and for dealing with pieces of obscure provenance. Aisha decided she needed to go to Venice. She knew the city, with its canals and its history of secrets, would be the perfect setting for such a sophisticated forger. The trip to Venice was different from the previous ones. This time, Aisha wasn't on a high-risk infiltration mission, but on a more subtle investigation, looking for clues that could lead to the master forger. She stayed in a charming little hotel, away from the tourists, and began frequenting old bookstores, art galleries, and the cafes where collectors and antiques dealers gathered. She introduced herself as a researcher, interested in the history of Venetian calligraphy, using her reputation as the director of the Al-Fayed Institute to open doors. She talked to dealers, asking about recent auctions, unusual pieces, anything that might lead her to the papyrus's trail. Aisha soon discovered that the auction where Arthur Pendleton had acquired the papyrus was organized by a mysterious figure known only as Il Calligrafo, the calligrapher. No one seemed to know his real name, his face, or where he lived. He operated in the shadows, organizing exclusive auctions for a select circle of collectors, and his pieces were always of exceptional quality. Il Calligrafo, Aisha murmured to herself. The name was almost a taunt. She knew she needed a way to get close to Il Calligrafo. The opportunity arose when she learned of an upcoming auction, even more exclusive than the last, where an illuminated medieval manuscript, supposedly a unique piece, would be auctioned. Aisha knew that Il Calligrafo was the master forger. The sophistication of the papyrus, the discretion of his operations, the name, it all fit. She needed an invitation to the auction. She turned to Arthur Pendleton. She contacted him, explaining that the papyrus he had donated was a high-quality forgery and that she believed the forger was Il Calligrafo himself. Pendleton, a man with an inflated ego, was furious to learn he had been deceived. He agreed to help Aisha get an invitation to the auction under the pretext that he wanted to confront Il Calligrafo personally. The invitation arrived, an elegantly calligraphed scroll with an old wax seal. It was an invitation to a masquerade ball, to be held in an isolated Venetian palace, accessible only by gondola. Aisha knew she was walking into the lion's den. Il Calligrafo was a master of deception, and the masquerade ball would be the perfect setting for his games. She needed to be more cunning, more observant, more invisible than ever before. Elias and Lena, concerned for Aisha's safety, insisted on accompanying her. Elias organized a discreet security team that would blend in with the guests, while Lena, with her social grace, would be Aisha's front. On the day of the ball, Venice was shrouded in a mysterious fog. Aisha, dressed in a period gown and a Venetian mask, felt the adrenaline course through her veins. She was about to face the master forger, the man who challenged the very essence of truth. The palace was a labyrinth of sumptuous halls, lit by candles and crystal chandeliers. Masks of all kinds danced to the sound of a chamber orchestra. Aisha, with her trained eyes, searched for any sign, any anomaly, anything that might reveal the identity of Il Calligrafo. She knew he would be there, watching, assessing, enjoying his own game. She had to find him before he found her. The masquerade ball at the Venetian palace was a spectacle of opulence and mystery. Hundreds of guests, all masked and dressed in period costumes, danced and conversed, their voices muffled by the orchestra's music and the clinking of crystal glasses. Aisha, with her black lace mask and dark velvet dress, felt like a piece in an intricate chess game, where every move was calculated and every glance could hide an intention. Elias and his security team were scattered throughout the palace, blended in with the guests, their trained eyes scanning the environment for any threat. Lena, with her feathered mask and innate charm, circulated among the groups, gathering information and creating diversions, while Arthur Pendleton, wearing a golden lion mask, seemed more interested in enjoying the party than in his revenge. Aisha knew that finding Il Calligrafo amidst that masked crowd would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. She needed a strategy that went beyond simple observation. She needed to think like a forger, like an artist of deception. Her mind turned to the calligraphy of the forged papyrus, the fluidity, the subtle modernity that bothered her. It was Il Calligrafo's signature, the mark he couldn't erase. She needed to find someone who exhibited that same fluidity, that same modernity, in their gestures, in their posture, in their way of interacting. Aisha began to observe the guests' hands, not just the hands holding glasses or fans, but the hands that gestured, that moved with a certain elegance, with an almost artistic precision. She was looking for a calligrapher, someone who had writing in their DNA, who expressed it in every movement. She circulated through the halls, passing by groups in lively conversation, by dancing couples, by solitary figures observing the scene. Her eyes scanned the environment, looking for that detail, that anomaly. It was then that she saw him. In a more secluded corner of the main hall, near a crackling fireplace, a man stood, watching the party with an almost studied stillness. His mask was simple, unadorned, but his eyes visible through the slits were intense and observant. And his hands were in constant motion, gesturing softly as he spoke with a masked woman. They were not large or dramatic gestures, but small, precise movements, as if he were tracing invisible letters in the air. There was a fluidity, an elegance, a modernity in his movements that Aisha recognized immediately. It was the same signature she had seen in the papyrus. Aisha felt a chill. It was him. Il Calligrafo. She approached discreetly, keeping a safe distance, but observing every detail. The man was tall, with an erect posture and an air of distinction. His voice, when he spoke, was soft and melodious, with an almost imperceptible Italian accent. Aisha needed a way to confirm his identity, to make him reveal his signature more explicitly. She remembered the illuminated medieval manuscript that was to be auctioned. It was the perfect bait. She approached Arthur Pendleton, who was in a lively conversation with a group of collectors. "Mr. Pendleton," she whispered, "Il Calligrafo is over there, the man in the simple mask near the fireplace. We need you to confront him about the forged papyrus. It will force him to react, to expose himself." Pendleton, a glint of revenge in his eyes, nodded. He strode over to the masked man, his voice loud enough to attract the attention of a few guests. "Il Calligrafo!" Pendleton exclaimed, his voice thick with indignation. "You deceived me! The papyrus you sold me is a forgery!" The masked man turned slowly, his eyes fixed on Pendleton. He didn't deny the accusation, nor did he show any surprise. Instead, he smiled, an enigmatic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Pendleton," Il Calligrafo replied, his voice soft but with a hint of irony, "the art of forgery is in itself a form of art, and the beauty of a piece lies not only in its authenticity, but in the skill of its creator." Aisha felt a shiver. He wasn't denying it. He was bragging. "You're a criminal," Pendleton retorted, his voice trembling with anger. "You manipulate history for your own profit." Il Calligrafo took a step forward, his posture imposing. "I do not manipulate history, Mr. Pendleton. I reinterpret it, I enhance it, I make it more beautiful." He paused, and his eyes swept over the crowd, as if assessing everyone present. "And you, Mr. Pendleton, were a willing participant in my game. It is not my fault if you fail to appreciate true art." Aisha knew it was time. She stepped forward, her voice calm and firm, cutting through the tense air. "The art of forgery, Il Calligrafo, is a betrayal of the truth, and the truth, no matter how you try to reinterpret it, always prevails." Il Calligrafo turned to Aisha, his eyes fixed on her. He sized her up for a moment, a flicker of recognition in his gaze. "Ah, the guardian of history. I knew you would come. Your reputation precedes you." He extended his hand, an elegant, challenging gesture. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Alessandro Rossi, and I am indeed Il Calligrafo." Aisha felt the adrenaline course through her veins. She had found the master forger. But the confrontation was just beginning. Alessandro Rossi's revelation as Il Calligrafo was not a shock to Aisha, but a confirmation. The elegance of his posture, the fluidity of his gestures, the veiled arrogance in his words, it all fit the profile of the master forger she had imagined. The masquerade ball, with its atmosphere of deception and mystery, had become the stage for the final confrontation. "Alessandro Rossi," Aisha repeated, savoring the name. "Your reputation also precedes you. A talented artist, no doubt, but an artist who has chosen to use his gift to distort the truth." Rossi smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Truth, miss, is a matter of perspective, and history, as we well know, is written by the victors. I merely offer a more aesthetically pleasing version." Arthur Pendleton, still furious, tried to intervene, but Aisha held him back with a gesture. She knew the confrontation with Rossi would not be won with shouts or accusations. It would be a battle of intellects, of subtleties, of knowledge. "Your art, Mr. Rossi, comes at a cost," Aisha argued. "It devalues the work of true historians, deceives collectors, and most importantly, steals the cultural heritage of entire nations." Rossi shrugged. "A small price to pay for beauty. Besides, I don't force anyone to buy my pieces. My clients come to me because they desire something unique, something that transcends mere authenticity." Aisha knew she couldn't convince him with moral arguments. She needed a strategy that would unmask him publicly, in front of his own clients and admirers. She needed to use Rossi's own arrogance against him. "You consider yourself an artist, Mr. Rossi," Aisha said, her voice calm but with a hint of challenge. "But a true artist does not fear the light. He does not hide behind masks and secret auctions. He displays his work for the world to be judged on its merits." Rossi raised an eyebrow. "And what do you propose, guardian of history?" "I propose a challenge," Aisha replied, her eyes locked on his. "A public demonstration of your art. You, Alessandro Rossi, against the truth, on a stage, in front of everyone. If you are so confident in your skill, why not—" Display it openly. A murmur spread among the guests. The idea of a public challenge between the guardian of history and the master forger was intriguing. Rossi pondered for a moment, his eyes sweeping over the crowd. He was a man of ego, and the idea of displaying his superiority on a stage before such a select audience was tempting. "And what would be the nature of this challenge?" Rossi asked, a smug smile on his lips. "You will have to reproduce a historical document of your choosing in a limited time, and I, with the help of my team, will have to authenticate it. If you can deceive me and my team, you will have proven your point. But if we can unmask your art, you will have to publicly confess your forgeries and submit to justice." Rossi laughed, a cold, calculating sound. "An interesting challenge, but what if I refuse?" "Then, Mr. Rossi, you will have proven that your art is nothing more than a magic trick, one that only works in the shadows, and your reputation, which you so cherish, will be destroyed. Your clients, whom you so despise, will know they were deceived by a charlatan." Aisha knew she had struck a nerve. Reputation was everything to Rossi. He extended his hand, a gesture of acceptance. "I accept your challenge, guardian of history, but know that you are underestimating true art." The challenge was set for the following week, in an exhibition hall in Venice with journalists, academics, and collectors from around the world in attendance. Elias and Lena, though concerned for Aisha's safety, knew this was the only way to unmask Rossi once and for all. Aisha and her team worked tirelessly, preparing for the challenge. They studied Rossi's techniques in depth, analyzing every detail of the forged papyrus, looking for any clue that might reveal his signature. On the day of the challenge, the exhibition hall was packed. Alessandro Rossi, unmasked, was on stage, with a table full of parchments, inks, and tools. Aisha, alongside Lena and Elias, was in the front row, her eyes fixed on Rossi. The challenge began. Rossi, with impressive calm, began to reproduce a fragment of a medieval manuscript. His movements were precise, his calligraphy flawless. He worked with a speed and mastery that left the audience breathless. Aisha watched every stroke, every detail. She knew the key would not be in obvious mistakes, but in the subtleties, in the small imperfections that would reveal the forger's hand. After a few hours, Rossi presented his work. It was a near-perfect reproduction, indistinguishable from the original to the naked eye. The audience applauded, impressed by the forger's skill. Now it was Aisha's turn. She took the stage, accompanied by Lena, and began to analyze the manuscript. She used magnifying glasses, microscopes, and even a small portable spectrometer to analyze the ink composition. The tension in the hall was palpable. Everyone awaited the verdict. Aisha examined the manuscript for a long time, her eyes scanning every detail. She noticed the fluidity of the script, the same she had seen in the papyrus. But there was something more, something she had only been able to identify after hours of studying Rossi's techniques. "Mr. Rossi," Aisha said, her voice clear and firm, "your skill is undeniable, but your art has a flaw that reveals the forger's hand." She pointed to a small detail in the calligraphy, a subtle way of connecting two letters that was characteristic of a writing style that would only emerge centuries after the original manuscript. It was Rossi's signature, a mark he had been unable to completely erase. "This small imperfection," Aisha explained, "reveals that this manuscript, though beautiful, is not authentic. It is a forgery, Mr. Rossi. A work of art, yes, but a lie." The audience fell silent. Rossi, for the first time, looked shocked. He looked at the manuscript, at the detail Aisha had pointed out, and a bitter smile appeared on his lips. "You've caught me, guardian of history," Rossi admitted, his voice low but audible. "I underestimated your passion for the truth." Rossi's confession was a shock to the art world. The news spread quickly, and the master forger was brought to justice. Aisha's victory was complete. She had unmasked the most sophisticated forger of her time, and the global registry of authentic documents had proven its worth. But Aisha knew that the fight for truth would never end. New challenges would arise, new threats to history, and she would be there, the guardian of truth, ready to face them. The victory over Alessandro Rossi, Il Calligrafo, was a resounding triumph for Aisha and the Al-Fayed Institute. Rossi's public confession, broadcast live to the world, not only unmasked one of the most sophisticated forgers in history, but also solidified Aisha's reputation as the unwavering guardian of truth. The global registry of authentic documents gained even more credibility, becoming the world standard for authenticating historical manuscripts and artifacts. However, Aisha knew that the battle against forgery was a war without end. For every forger unmasked, a new one would emerge, more cunning, more adaptable. Human nature, with its pursuit of profit, power, or recognition, would always find new ways to distort the truth. Her next great challenge came not from a new forger, but from a more insidious and systemic threat. The rise of artificial intelligence, AI, in the creation of forgeries. With the advancement of neural networks and machine learning, the ability to generate text, images, and even calligraphy that perfectly mimicked historical originals was becoming a frightening reality. Aisha received the first reports of a new type of forgery that was beginning to circulate on the black market. They were documents that, at first glance, passed all authentication tests. The ink composition, the age of the parchment, the calligraphy, everything seemed perfect. But there was a subtle inconsistency, a lack of soul that Aisha, with her keen intuition, could sense. "It's as if history is being written by a machine," Aisha explained to Lena and Elias, as they examined a fragment of a supposed 17th-century explorer's journal. "There are no obvious errors, no anachronisms, but there's also none of the human imperfection, the emotion, the individuality that makes a historical document unique." Lena, who had delved into research on AI, nodded. Generative adversarial networks, GANs, are capable of learning complex patterns and generating new data that is indistinguishable from the originals. They can analyze millions of examples of ancient calligraphy and create a new one that looks authentic, but never existed. Elias, concerned about the security implications, added, "If we can't distinguish the real from the fake, the very foundation of our history could be compromised. This is an existential threat." Aisha realized that the fight against forgery had entered a new era. The tools and techniques that had been effective against human forgers would be insufficient against artificial intelligence. She needed to evolve, and the Al-Fayed Institute needed to evolve with her. Her first step was to create a new department within the institute, focused exclusively on detecting AI-generated forgeries. She assembled a multidisciplinary team of computer scientists, AI experts, historians, and paleographers. The goal was to develop algorithms and tools that could identify the digital signatures of AI forgeries, the small anomalies that would reveal their artificial origin. Aisha also launched a research program to explore the use of AI as a tool for authentication. The idea was to train AI models to analyze historical documents, identifying patterns and anomalies that might go unnoticed by the human eye. AI, which was the threat, could also be the solution. International collaboration became even more crucial. Aisha organized a global summit on AI and historical preservation, bringing together experts from around the world to discuss the challenges and opportunities that artificial intelligence presented. She argued that protecting history was a collective responsibility, and that the global community needed to work together to develop solutions. Aisha's personal life continued to be a constant juggling act. She had learned to accept the visibility and the constant presence of security. She found solace in her moments of solitude, in reading old books, in contemplating the beauty of history. Her mother, Lena, and Elias remained her pillars, the voices that kept her anchored amidst the storm. Aisha also began mentoring young researchers, inspiring them with her passion for history and her determination to protect the truth. She knew the mission was bigger than her, and that the next generation needed to be prepared for the challenges to come. Aisha's next great challenge would be the battle of the algorithms. She knew that AI forgers would continue to improve their models, making their forgeries increasingly indistinguishable. The technological arms race had begun, and the Al-Fayed Institute needed to be at the forefront. Aisha was ready. She had faced human forgers, kings, and masters of deception. Now she was about to face artificial intelligence, the most sophisticated threat history had ever known. Her mission was to protect the truth, no matter what form the lie took. The battle of the algorithms was not a war of weapons, but of minds, of code, and of a deep understanding of both history and technology. Aisha knew that victory would not come from a single breakthrough, but from continuous evolution, from constant adaptation, to the new tactics of AI forgers. The very definition of authenticity and historical truth was at stake, and the Al-Fayed Institute under her leadership was on the front lines. The new AI forgery detection department became the beating heart of the institute. Aisha assembled an elite team comprising data scientists, machine learning experts, digital paleographers, and historians, with a profound knowledge of stylistic and contextual patterns. The synergy between these seemingly disparate fields was the key to success. Aisha's strategy was multifaceted. First, they needed to understand how the forger AIs operated. The team began creating their own generative AIs, feeding them vast databases of authentic historical documents. The goal was to simulate the forgery process, learning the digital signatures that AIs left behind, even if they were imperceptible to the human eye. "It's like learning to think like the enemy," Aisha explained to her team. "If we know how they create, we'll know how to detect." Second, the Institute invested heavily in research and development of new AI-based authentication tools. The idea was to use artificial intelligence to fight artificial intelligence. They developed algorithms capable of analyzing millions of data points in a document, the microtexture of the parchment, the distribution of pigments in the ink, the pressure of the pen on each stroke, and comparing them against databases of authentic documents. These algorithms didn't look for obvious errors, but for statistical deviations, for patterns that didn't fit the natural variability of human creation. They sought the imperfect perfection of the human hand, the controlled randomness that an AI, no matter how sophisticated, still struggled to replicate. The global registry of authentic documents was updated to include a blockchain-based security layer for every digitized document. This ensured that once a document was authenticated and registered, its digital integrity would be unalterable, creating a reliable source of historical truth. Aisha also realized that education was more important than ever. She launched a global campaign to raise public awareness about the dangers of AI forgeries and the importance of critically verifying sources. The Al-Fayed Institute became a center of excellence in digital literacy, offering courses and workshops for historians, archivists, and the general public. The battle of the algorithms was a constant arms race. As the Institute developed new detection tools, the AI forgers improved their models, making their creations even more convincing. It was an endless cycle of innovation and counter-innovation. There were moments of frustration, of despair. Documents that seemed authentic would pass all tests, only to be revealed as AI forgeries by a new tool developed by Aisha's team. The line between real and fake was becoming increasingly blurred. Aisha, however, remained steadfast. She knew the fight was not just about technology, but about the very essence of humanity. History, for her, was not just a record of facts, but the narrative of the human experience, with all its imperfections, its passions, and its truths. In a moment of reflection, as she watched her team work tirelessly, Aisha had an epiphany. The soullessness she felt in the AI forgeries was not a technical flaw, but a fundamental one. AI could replicate the form, but it could not replicate the intention, the emotion, the complexity of the human mind that created history. Our advantage, she told Lena, is not just in our algorithms, but in our humanity. AI can mimic the handwriting, but it can't mimic the scribe's passion, the monk's fear, the explorer's hope. It's that human signature, that intangible essence, that we need to learn to detect. Aisha's team began developing new AI models that not only analyzed form, but also tried to infer the intent and emotional context behind a document's creation. They looked for patterns of human behavior, of creativity, of fallibility, that the forger AIs, by their nature, could not replicate. The Battle of the algorithms continued, but Aisha felt they were gaining ground. The very definition of authenticity was being redefined, not just as the absence of forgery, but as the undeniable presence of the human hand, the human mind, the human soul. Aisha, the guardian of history, had become the guardian of humanity in a digital age. Her mission, which began with a forged scroll, had evolved to protect the very essence of truth in a world where reality and simulation were increasingly intertwined. The battle of the algorithms transformed the Al-Fayed Institute into a beacon of innovation and resilience. Aisha, at the forefront of this revolution, was not only leading the detection of AI forgeries, but also redefining the role of history in the digital age. Her vision went beyond mere authentication. She sought to strengthen the human connection to the past in a world where technology threatened to blur the line between the real and the simulated. The future for Aisha was not just about fighting forger AI, but about embracing AI as an ally in preserving and understanding history. The AI Forgery Detection Department evolved into the Historical Intelligence Lab, a research center that explored AI's potential to unravel historical mysteries, restore damaged documents, and make history more accessible to everyone. One of the lab's most ambitious projects was Project Kronos. Using advanced AI algorithms, Kronos was able to analyze fragments of historical documents, even the most damaged ones, and reconstruct their original context. It could identify patterns in writing, vocabulary, and style that allowed historians to fill in gaps, date documents with unprecedented accuracy, and even suggest the authorship of anonymous texts. "We are not just protecting the past," Aisha explained at an international conference. "We are rescuing it. AI allows us to hear voices that were silenced by time, to see images that were erased by history." Project Kronos had remarkable success in the digital restoration of a nearly illegible Mayan codex, revealing new information about the civilization's astronomy and mythology. The discovery generated global excitement, demonstrating AI's potential to enrich our understanding of the past rather than distort it. However, the expansion of the Historical Intelligence Lab brought new ethical dilemmas. The ability of AI to fill in the gaps raised questions about historical interpretation. To what extent could AI infer information without introducing its own biases? How could they ensure that AI reconstructions were based on solid evidence and not mere probabilities? Aisha, always attentive to nuance, established a rigorous ethics committee to oversee all of the lab's projects. She insisted that AI should be a tool to assist human research, not to replace it. The final decision on historical interpretation would always rest with historians, with AI providing data and insights to inform their conclusions. Aisha's personal life, though still intense, found a new rhythm. She had learned to delegate, to trust her team, and to set aside time for herself. Her visits to her mother became more frequent, and she found a new hobby in calligraphy, a way to reconnect with the art of writing in a more personal and meditative way. Lena Petrova, now head of research at the Historical Intelligence Lab, and Elias, who had become the director of global operations for the Institute, remained her inseparable confidants and partners. The team, which began as a small group of experts, had transformed into a global community of history's defenders. The Al-Fayed Institute, under Aisha's leadership, was no longer just an authentication center, but a hub of innovation, a guardian of truth in all its forms. Aisha's mission had evolved from fighting forgers to shaping the future of human interaction with history. Aisha's next great challenge would be to ensure that access to these new technologies and knowledge was equitable. She knew that history, at its core, belonged to everyone, and that the tools to protect and understand it should not be the privilege of a few. Aisha began planning the creation of a scholarship program and partnerships with universities in developing countries to train the next generation of digital historians and AI experts. She dreamed of a world where every culture had the means to protect and celebrate its own history without fear of forgery or manipulation. Aisha's journey from a hotel server to a global leader was a testament to her passion, her intelligence, and her unwavering belief in the truth. She had proven that history was not merely a record of the past, but a living force shaping the present and the future. And she, Aisha, was its guardian, ready to face any challenge that lay ahead, certain that the truth, in the end, would always find its way. Aisha's legacy would not be limited to detecting forgeries or implementing advanced technologies. Her deeper vision was the democratization of history, ensuring that access to the past was not a privilege but a universal right. She believed that by empowering global communities with the tools to protect and interpret their own narratives, she would be building a future more resilient to manipulation and disinformation. The scholarship program and partnerships with universities in developing countries, which Aisha had envisioned, flourished under her leadership. Young talents from diverse cultures and backgrounds were brought to the Al Fayed Institute, where they received cutting-edge training in digital paleography, forensic document analysis, and the ethical use of artificial intelligence in historical research. These history ambassadors, as Aisha called them, returned to their home countries to establish authentication and research centers, replicating the Institute's model and adapting it to their local realities. Aisha traveled tirelessly, inaugurating these centers, speaking in remote communities, and inspiring a new generation of history's guardians. She became an iconic figure, recognized for her passion, her intelligence, and her ability to unite people around a common purpose. Her story, from a hotel server to a global leader, resonated deeply, showing that a passion for truth could transcend any barrier. One of the most impactful projects of this program was the collaboration with indigenous communities in South America. Using Project Kronos, Aisha's team helped digitize and interpret ancient codices and oral records that were at risk of being lost. The AI, trained with the help of local linguists and elders, was able to identify patterns and connections that revealed new layers of knowledge about the history, cosmology, and cultural practices of these communities. The result was a cultural revitalization, with history being told and celebrated by the very voices that created it. Aisha also dedicated herself to combating digital amnesia, the risk that the vast amount of digital information generated today could be lost in the future due to technological obsolescence or a lack of proper preservation. She led the creation of a global digital memory archive, an initiative to ensure that the digital records of our era would be preserved for future generations, with the same rigorous authentication and provenance that the Institute applied to ancient documents. Aisha's legacy was manifested not only in the technologies and programs she implemented, but in the culture she cultivated. She instilled in her team and her partners a deep respect for history, an insatiable curiosity, and an unwavering ethic. She taught that truth was not a destination, but a continuous journey requiring vigilance, humility, and an open mind. Aisha, now a mature woman with silver-streaked hair, still found time for her calligraphy sessions, her personal refuge. She saw in the beauty of the letters, in the precision of the strokes, a reflection of the order and truth she sought in her life and her work. She had found a balance between the intensity of her mission and the serenity of her inner life. The Al Fayed Institute, under her leadership, became a model for other institutions, an example of how technology and humanity could unite to protect the past and shape a more informed and conscious future. The battle of the algorithms had transformed into an alliance of intelligence, where AI was a powerful tool in the service of truth and human understanding. Aisha's impact was immeasurable. She didn't just save documents, she saved narratives, cultures, and ultimately humanity's very ability to connect with its past authentically. Her vision of a democratized, accessible, and protected history was becoming a reality. Elias, now an older man but still with a watchful eye, observed Aisha at one of her lectures. "She's not just a director," he commented to Lena. "She's a legend, the guardian of history, yes, but also the architect of the future." Lena smiled. "And proof that a passion for truth can move mountains, or in this case, rewrite the future of history." Aisha, at the end of her lecture, looked out at the audience composed of young and old from all parts of the world. She saw in their eyes the same curiosity, the same thirst for knowledge that drove her, and she knew that her legacy would continue, not just in the institutions she built, but in the minds and hearts of those she inspired to become the next guardians of truth. The future of history was in good hands, and Aisha, the woman who began her journey in a Monaco hotel, had fulfilled her mission, leaving a lasting legacy that would echo through the ages. The setting sun painted the Geneva sky in shades of orange and purple, reflecting on the calm waters of the lake. Aisha, now in her early 70s, watched the scene from the balcony of her office at the Al Fayed Institute. Beside her, Lena and Elias, also aged but with the same sparkle in their eyes, shared the contemplative silence. The annual conference on historical preservation had just ended, and the auditorium, once the stage of her greatest battle, now echoed with the applause of a new generation of historians and technologists. Aisha felt a pang of weariness, but it was a good kind of tired, the exhaustion of a life well lived, of a mission accomplished. She had seen the world change, technology advance by leaps and bounds, and the fight for truth transform in ways she could never have imagined. But through it all, her passion for history remained unshakable. Suddenly, a young researcher, one of the history ambassadors she had mentored, ran onto the balcony, his face pale and his eyes wide. He held a tablet, which displayed an image of an ancient manuscript, apparently newly discovered. "Dr. Aisha," he exclaimed, his voice choked with emotion, "we just received this from a dig in the desert. It's a fragment of a Sumerian text and Kronos has authenticated it as genuine, but there's something strange. The AI detected an anomaly, a signature that doesn't match any known scribe." Aisha took the tablet, her eyes fixed on the image. The manuscript was beautiful, the calligraphy elegant, but there was a subtle dissonance, a fluidity she recognized. It wasn't the signature of Alessandro Rossi, nor that of a forger AI. It was something new, something that defied all her expectations. "It's as if the scribe was writing for the future," the young researcher murmured, almost to himself. "There's a complexity, a depth that seems to transcend its own era." Aisha felt a shiver run down her spine. She looked at Lena and Elias, who shared her expression of surprise. History, she realized, was a river that flowed in both directions. The past was not just something to be discovered, but something that could somehow communicate with the future. "It's not a forgery," Aisha said, her voice low but full of a new determination. "It's a message from the past, waiting to be deciphered by those who have the courage to listen." She handed the tablet back to the young researcher, an enigmatic smile on her lips. "The battle of the algorithms may be over, but the search for truth never ends. And history, my dear boy, always holds new secrets for those who dare to ask." Aisha turned to the horizon, the sun now completely set, and felt a new energy course through her body. The legacy she had built was not just about protecting the past, but about opening the doors to a future where history would continue to surprise us, to challenge us, and to connect us. End of story. Wow! What an incredible journey, right? From the mysterious forgery of the nautical chart in Monaco that launched Aisha into a web of intrigue and danger, to the shocking revelation of Prince Khalid as the mastermind behind a global network of historical manipulation. We followed Aisha as she unmasked the sophisticated Il Calligrafo at a Venetian masquerade ball, and finally led humanity in the battle of the algorithms against AI forgeries, redefining the very essence of historical truth. If you were moved, surprised, and inspired by Aisha's passion for the truth, then don't miss any more of our stories. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters of engaging narratives like this one. Leave a like if you enjoyed Aisha's journey, and comment on what the most memorable moment was for you. And of course, share with your friends and family so more people can join us on these adventures. Want more amazing stories? Don't worry. To the left, you'll find a playlist packed with other narratives that will grab your attention from start to finish. Click and dive into new worlds of adventure, mystery, and emotion. Your next great story is waiting for you.